Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Today, my guest will be Mohammed Hadi, who is the Deputy Special Coordinator, Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process. As soon as I'm finished with my briefing, he will join us from Jerusalem to give us an update on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. And speaking of Gaza, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that a surge of humanitarian aid continues to enter the Strip. OCHA says that our priorities include food assistance, opening bakeries, providing healthcare, restocking hospitals, repairing water networks, bringing material to repair shelters, and starting family reunifications. Today, OCHA and its partners visited Jabalya camp in North Gaza governorate. They report that people there are creating makeshift shelters in the middle of the rubble. There's also a critical lack of access to water, with all wells destroyed, and the risk of unexploded ordnance remains high. We and our humanitarian partners are mobilizing to provide food and emergency shelter support. With the ceasefire in place, displaced Palestinians have been making their way back home, with many returning to find mountains of rubble. According to our partners working on the shelter response, more than 90% of housing units in Gaza have been damaged or destroyed over the past 15 months. Given the scale of destruction and needs in Gaza, we are working to get vital aid to people as fast as humanly possible. We also urge member states and partners to ensure that our aid operations are funded to meet the overwhelming needs. Turning to the West Bank, OCHA is extremely concerned about the safety and well-being of Palestinians in Jenin City and Jenin refugee camp, where the Israeli forces have been operating today. According to initial reports, airstrikes, heavy bulldozing, and the operation of undercover forces have resulted in several fatalities and dozens of injuries, including among medical personnel. This latest Israeli operation in Jenin refugee camp follows weeks of clashes there between Palestinian forces and armed Palestinians. UNRWA says that as of last week, about 2,000 families have been displaced from the camp during those clashes. Previous Israeli operations in Jenin refugee camp have damaged critical infrastructure, and as a result, the camp remains largely disconnected from basic services, including water. Electricity and solid waste management have also been disrupted. Earlier this month, the UN and our humanitarian partners were distributing mattresses and blankets to those displaced, but humanitarians have not been able to safely access the area more recently on a reliable basis. The Secretary General arrived in Davos, Switzerland this morning to attend the annual World Economic Forum. Tomorrow morning, he will deliver a special address at the forum. He's expected to say that climate change and ungoverned artificial intelligence are two profound threats that demand much more attention and intelligent collaboration than they are receiving, as they threaten to upend life as we know it. You can also expect him to reserve some sharp words at those parts of the private sector that are actively backtracking on climate goals. Later this evening, the Secretary General will participate in a leadership dialogue on digital and emerging technologies, where he will promote the recently adopted Global Digital Compact as a tool that provides a new framework to help ensure that technology benefits all of humanity, guided by strong guardrails that minimize risks while amplifying the benefits. He is expected to call on the private sector, the philanthropic community, and member states to work together with their relative strengths to ensure that artificial intelligence serves its highest purpose, advancing human progress, equality, and dignity for all countries and all people. The Secretary General will finish the day by delivering remarks at a dinner organized by global investors for sustainable development. This morning, the Deputy Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, spoke to the Security Council during a session on countering terrorism in Africa. She told Council members that Africa has remained the epicenter of global terrorism, with the Sahel as ground zero for one of the world's most brutal crises. For 3 straight years, terrorism-related deaths in that region have soared past 6,000, making up more than half of all global fatalities. Burkina Faso is now leading the world in terrorism deaths with a staggering 68% increase, and with little support to help reverse this trend. Ms. Mohammed told Council members that countering terrorism on the African continent must continue to innovate with an approach that holds the respect for human rights and the rule of law at its core. First, she said, we need to continue to address the drivers of terrorism. Second, she added, we need human rights-based approaches to counterterrorism, grounded in accountable and inclusive institutions. And third, the Deputy Secretary General said that regional cooperation is the linchpin of any effective counterterrorism strategy. Fragmenting our efforts only plays into the hands of the perpetrators. She called for the coordination of all efforts, adding that the Security Council has a critical role in supporting African Union counterterrorism initiatives, grounded in African leadership and solutions. Her full remarks were shared with you. Moving to Syria, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs tells us that amid heightened insecurity in eastern Aleppo, a UN humanitarian mission went to the city of Manbij yesterday. The mission met with local authorities, the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, and local non-governmental organizations to identify and address issues, including those related to the Tishreen Dam, which continue to face attacks in its surrounding areas as of yesterday. The team also visited the Manbij National Hospital, where health workers are working voluntarily with limited resources due to past looting of equipment, ambulances, and generators. Also yesterday, OCHA and the UN Children's Fund completed a monitoring mission to the Ain al-Baida water station in eastern Aleppo, which had been recently rehabilitated with the support of the Syria Humanitarian Fund. In addition to incidents linked to ongoing hostilities, civilians, particularly children, are also at risk from explosive ordnance contamination across several governorates. Our partners have recorded 69 explosive ordnance incidents over the first 2 weeks of January, in which 45 people were killed and 60 others wounded. Since the 26th of November, a total of 134 new areas with explosive remnants of war have been identified by partners across 5 governorates: Idlib, Aleppo, Hama, Deir ez-Zor, and Latakia. As people continue to move and return to their communities, our partners are calling for increased and flexible funding for mine action, including risk education and emergency clearance, particularly roads and bridges. And OCHA says that increased funding is also needed to ensure the continuation of services, including in camps sheltering displaced people. And just to give you an example of the dire situation without sufficient funding, in northwest Syria, water and sanitation services have been suspended in many displacement camps due to funding gaps, affecting more than 635,000 people. We continue to call for the support of the international community to bridge those gaps. Turning to Mali, we and our partners, together with the country's transitional authorities, today launched in Bamako a $770 million humanitarian needs and response plan to support millions of people across the country this year. The plan aims to address the urgent needs of 4.7 million people affected by conflict, displacement, health emergencies, and climate shocks. Nearly 80% of the people to be reached with aid are women and children. The plan aims to provide them with food, water, healthcare, and protection support, among other assistance. The UN and our partners have worked closely with the Malian transitional authorities to develop the needs analysis and response plan. We're also working hard to ensure humanitarian action complements and promotes resilience and longer-term development goals. We're grateful for the authorities' continued leadership on these issues and welcome our ongoing partnership to deliver principled humanitarian aid and support resilience and development. Last year, partners mobilized nearly 40% of what was required, just over $270 million, enabling life-saving assistance and protection to reach 1.8 million people. The acting humanitarian coordinator there, Hasim Deng, said that it is urgent that the entire humanitarian community and donors renew their commitment to addressing essential humanitarian needs. Turning to Mozambique, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that access issues continue to hamper humanitarian operations in some parts of the country. Our humanitarian partners say that access restraints, including illegal checkpoints, unofficial requests for payments to cross checkpoints, and threats to NGO vehicles and other government convoys carrying aid, are affecting the main supply roads that our partners use in Cabo Delgado. OCHA is engaging with provincial and district authorities, including community leaders, to advocate for the safe access and safety of humanitarian workers. Meanwhile, insecurity across the provinces of Cabo Delgado and Nampula is also disrupting the delivery of humanitarian aid to more than 700,000 people impacted by the 2 recent cyclones in the country. And you may have seen our comments in response to your questions on the White House announcement that the United States will withdraw from the Paris Agreement, but I wanted to read it into the record. The Paris Agreement was adopted by all the world's nations in 2015 because they recognized the immense harm that climate change is already causing and the enormous opportunity that climate action presents. It offers a meaningful yet flexible framework for action by all countries. The last 10 years have been the hottest in recorded history. We have to look no further than Los Angeles to see this human, ecological, and economic disaster play out. The collective efforts under the Paris Agreement have made a difference, but we need to go much further and faster together. The transformation envisaged in the Paris Agreement is already underway. The Paris Agreement has unleashed an energy revolution, offering unparalleled opportunities for countries and businesses to invest in renewables that power the 21st century jobs and prosperity. Leaders must seize these opportunities in this critical decade for climate action. The Secretary General remains confident that cities, states, and businesses within the United States, along with other countries, will continue to demonstrate vision and leadership by working for the low-carbon, resilient economic growth that will create quality jobs and markets for 21st century prosperity. It is crucial that the United States remain a leader on environmental issues. And last, the World Health Organization today said that it regrets the announcement that the United States of America intends to withdraw from the organization. And I would also like to add the Secretary General's consistent support for the work of the World Health Organization. WHO pointed out that the United States was a founding member of WHO in 1948 and has participated in shaping and governing WHO's work ever since, alongside its other member states, including through its active participation in the World Health Assembly and Executive Board. For over 7 decades, WHO and the USA have saved countless lives and protected Americans and all people from health threats. Together, WHO and the US ended smallpox, and together, WHO and the US have brought polio to the brink of eradication. With the participation of the United States and other member states, WHO has, over the past 7 years, implemented the largest set of reforms in its history to transform its accountability, cost-effectiveness, and impact in countries. This work continues. WHO said that it hopes the United States will reconsider. The agency added that it looks forward to engaging in constructive dialogue to maintain the partnership between the USA and WHO for the benefit of the health and well-being of millions of people across the globe. And that's it. Yes, Gabriel?
Thank you, Farhan. Who is the UN's liaison to the new administration in Washington?
The UN's liaison?
Who at the UN is communicating with the Trump administration?
We have our information center there. I believe the head of the information recently was William Davis. I think that there's been a change recently, but I'll check.
Okay, and on Gaza, OCHA announced 915 trucks getting into Gaza in a 24-hour period. Earlier this month, as early as January 16th, there were only 6 trucks. Of course, that was before the ceasefire. My question is it clear now that Israel was using, for many months now, using starvation as a weapon of war?
Well, I don't want to get into what the motivations are. Obviously, there was a war fighting going on. But of course, our guest, Mohammed Hadi, will be here to talk to you further about what the conditions in Gaza have been. Tony.
Thank you, Farhan. On WHO and the US withdrawal from this organization, how do you see that this withdrawal is going to affect the work of the agency, and what would be exactly the impact on it?
Well, the agency, as you know, relies on a number of donors, both from governments and private donors. And obviously, any shortfall from one group or one country will put additional pressure on other countries and other donors to step up. And we hope and trust that our supporters of World Health around the world will rise to the challenge and make sure that the World Health Organization can continue to do its work. Edie and then Deshi.
Thank you, Farhan. Can you tell us about the UN presence in Jenin? Was UN staffers witnessing this latest military action by Israel?
There were staff, including UNRWA and other staff, who were trying to aid the people in Jenin. The problem has been that in recent days, with the fighting, it's been harder to get access, and certainly we hope that the situation will calm down so that we can also provide aid to the people who have been affected by the recent displacements, both between the inter-Palestinian fighting and the more recent Israeli actions.
And on a completely different subject, the United Nations, in many aspects, came under sharp criticism today at the confirmation hearing for the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, and I wondered if the UN had any response.
I wouldn't go into any sort of thing like a point-by-point rebuttal, but obviously it's clear the work that the United Nations and its agencies do. It's clear the importance we have in a variety of fields, whether we're talking about peacekeeping efforts around the world, whether we're talking about humanitarian aid, whether we're talking about the economic assistance that UNDP and other entities provide, whether you're talking about support for the environment, support for population planning. There's a world of activities that are promoted by the United Nations, and underlying it all is the core fact that what the United Nations has succeeded most at is making sure that all of the nations of the world have a reliable, peaceful venue where they can negotiate with each other and deal with all potential conflicts, all potential cross-cutting issues collectively. That's as much as I have to say on that. Deji, and then Sharife, and then Margaret.
Edie just inspired me. Well, I'm sorry.
She inspires us all.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Will the UN consider establish a kind of like a DOGE, DOGE department to tackle the efficiency of this institution, which has been criticized by the incoming U.S. ambassador?
I don't have any real reaction to comments. We get and are used to getting criticism from governments around the world. Part of the nature of this job is that we're not going to please all the governments all the time, and we accept that. What we want the governments of the world to appreciate is the value of the work that we do for all of them.
Okay, come back to my actual question. Now, when answering Gabby's question, you talked about the liaison, the contact with the White House.
And by the way, I was right. It is Will Davis. He's still the head of the UN Information Center in Washington.
Will there be any appointment or arrangement now of the communication between President Trump and the Secretary General of this organization?
UN Secretaries General always try to maintain communication with our host country and with government officials in our host country. You've seen different UN heads not just communicate with the presidents, but with key members of the US Congress, and we'll continue to do that.
Or maybe the newly appointed Secretary of State?
Yes.
Does he have that kind of arrangement?
Obviously, we tend to communicate with whoever is the U.S. Secretary of State, yes.
Okay, one last thing. Last year, I asked Florence about the arrears and how much U.S. owned the contribution to this organization. Do you have the exact figure of that?
By an amazing coincidence, some of your colleagues have been asking the same question today. And what I can tell you is that right now, the United States owes $1.5 billion to the regular budget of the UN.
1.5 billion.
1.5 billion. And then between the regular budget, the peacekeeping budget, and the tribunals, the total amount that they owe to all three is $2.8 billion.
Do you think you can get this money under Trump administration?
We have gotten the money for UN expenses under all of the various administrations in the past.
Which means there's another liquid cash flow problem maybe soon?
I don't want to anticipate. I mean, the point I'm getting at is under all previous administrations, we have continued our operations and we have received payments of dues. Sharife and then Margaret.
Thank you. Farhan, if you will allow me, I'd like to go back to the occupied West Bank. I think it's becoming increasingly clear that Israel is increasing its attacks in the West Bank following the ceasefire agreement in Gaza. Israel's justification for the attacks in Gaza was Hamas. So my first question is, do you know what their excuse is to attack Jenin? Israel has detained since Monday about 84 people in the West Bank. We also see a significant increase in settler violence. So I'm just wondering, does the Secretary General fear that the occupied West Bank may be the next up on the list of Israel and it may face a similar destruction to Gaza?
What I can say about that is that the Secretary General remains deeply concerned about the ongoing violence in the occupied West Bank, particularly the ongoing large-scale military operation in Jenin, which has reportedly resulted in Palestinian casualties. The Secretary General urges security forces to exercise maximum restraint and use lethal force only when it is strictly unavoidable to protect life. Maggie.
Thanks, Farhan. Further on the U.S. intention to leave the World Health Organization, just remind us, it takes 1 year for that to go into effect? Is it 1 year?
Yes.
Okay. And then you guys will lose money, but what will the United States lose by withdrawing? Are they going to lose access to information or data or anything that the World Health Organization maintains, like databases?
I think for that kind of detail, you should check with the World Health Organization what happens with the relationship that it has with the U.S. government. For our standpoint, of course, we are worried about any problems that impede international cooperation in dealing with health crises. Just a few years ago, you saw a major international pandemic, and we needed tremendous amounts of international cooperation in order to deal with that. And that, by the way, was during the Trump administration. And that cooperation, I think is very clear, helped to save lives.
And one other, please. Is there a dashboard somewhere or website where we can see the numbers of UN staff, permanent staff, and what countries they're from? Like, how, are there 50 employees from United States, 60 employees from Qatar? Like, is there something where that's laid out?
I believe that there's a yearly report that goes out as a document. So you could go to the documents or to the library and get that. There's a yearly report of staffing broken down by nationality.
Is that from the General Assembly?
I believe it would be probably a General Assembly document. But yes, it should be available online and in the online and in the library.
And then just one more on the announcement about leaving the Paris Accord. President Trump repeatedly said yesterday at various speeches and appearances, drill, baby, drill. That's going to be one of his administration's mottos. I know the Secretary General has repeatedly called for the end of fossil fuels. So what is his particular reaction to that particular new policy?
I don't think a catchphrase is a policy, but beyond that, the Secretary General's point of view is that there's no future in fossil fuels. We need to move towards a green economy and a sustainable economy so that we and future generations can continue to live in a planet that is livable. Okay, Ibtisam, and then we're going to go to the screens, and then we'll have round two of questions. But yes, Ibtisam.
Thank you, Farhan. Just to follow up on the WHO and the Paris Agreement, you confirmed to Maggie that it takes 1 year to go into effect when it comes to WHO. Is it the same? If I remember that correctly, it's the same also for the Paris Agreement. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And do you know how much the U.S. owns WHO, or is it still owning WHO or something?
I believe that they paid WHO recently, but you can check with our WHO colleagues where they stand.
Okay, and then just a follow-up on the issue of the U.S. dues and them not paying part of it. Can you remind us? I know that usually, if you don't pay your dues, you lose part of. You use your vote.
The rule is
when it does.
The rule is if your arrears to the regular budget are equal to the past 2 years' worth of regular budget dues, then you lose your vote in the General Assembly. Okay, let's go quickly to the screens, and then we'll go back into the room. Abdul Hamid, I believe you had a question?
Yes, I do, Farhan. Thank you. I have two questions. One on the released Palestinian and Israeli prisoners or captives. Have anyone from the UN compared the health situation of both sides, the 3 Israeli released and the Palestinian? Did anyone see the situation of Khalida Jarrar, who's a member of the Palestinian Council, and how does she look?
I believe that there are people examining the health of all of those who are released.
My second question, it's a war in Gaza that lasted 471, and the Secretary General did not step a foot in the war zone. How did that will resonate in the future for him to eyewitness and be in charge of the UN, observing a genocide war for 471 and not going to the field and see it by himself?
A number of UN officials were in Gaza, and the Secretary General himself, as you know, visited Rafah. So I'm not really sure what the point of your question is. Okay, Michelle Nichols.
Thanks, Farhan, and apologies if this has already been asked. I'm monitoring a few things at once. President Trump signed an executive order last night pausing foreign development assistance for 90 days. Does the UN have any clarity on how that might affect the UN and UN agencies?
It's not clear what effect that pause will have. Obviously, payments to different bodies and different agencies often take a period of time due to different budgetary cycles in different nations, so it's unclear.
And then just on you mentioned that you have to be 2 years in arrears to lose your vote in the GA. How close is the US to being 2 years in arrears?
You could do your math, the math for yourself, but I believe the answer is it's not especially close right now. Mike Wagenheim?
I was hoping you wouldn't say that.
Mike?
Yeah, Michelle actually took my question, so I don't have a question, but I do have an answer for Margaret. I had to research that report, so just for your information, it's a General Assembly report. It's called Composition of the Secretariat Staff Demographics. It's a report of the Secretary General. Hope that helps. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. I love when reporters help chip in with all this stuff. Edie.
Going back to the U.S. arrears, you said 1.5 billion for the regular budget, and then the total was 2.8 billion. So that means there was 1.3 billion between
Peacekeeping and the tribunals.
And the tribunals. How
Right.
much was peacekeeping?
I don't have the breakdown for each, but I believe that's in a document. I can find that for you.
And did the U.S. usually pays after its fiscal year. Did the U.S. actually pay anything for the last fiscal year?
Yeah, I believe we got very large payments towards the end of last year, the last few months of last year. There were not full payments to the budget, but there were substantial payments.
Can we get some details on, can you check on the details on that? Thank you.
Sure, I'll try to get some further details about what the last payments were. Stefano, and then Gabriel, and then Dennis, and then we'll go to our guest.
Thank you, Farhan. About President Trump's speech yesterday, when he mentioned again Panama, and he said that United States will retake the Panama Canal. You know, before we asked this question before, but the answer was that one administration at the time. Well, now there is actually the administration. He was president when he mentioned those words. Shouldn't the Secretary General say something about it? I mean, when a country, when a president of the country basically says that he will take territory over another country?
when it comes to any of these questions involving actual member states' territory, obviously we are governed, as you know, by the UN Charter, and you know that the UN Charter stands for the respect of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of member states, and all member states and their sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected.
Just a follow-up. Did the President of Panama contact in the last few hours the UN, the Secretary General, about this issue?
I'm not aware that he's had any contact with the Secretary General, no. Gabriel, and then Dennis, and then the guest.
Thank you, Farhan. I appreciate it. Now that the UN is able to get into areas of Gaza that they weren't able to before, given the ceasefire, does the UN feel that the death toll could rise in Gaza due to people that are buried under the rubble?
Now that there is a ceasefire, we hope that we will be able to get more reliable information and see whether either people can be found, or alternately, if they've perished, if we get that information. All of that will become more clear, but certainly one of the things that needs to happen is we need to be able to go about rubble removal. Dennis?
I have a couple of questions. First, Trump repeatedly said that he wants to rename Gulf, several geographical.
Whoever is online with their audio on, please turn that off. Sorry, Dennis.
Sorry, في الدار.
Okay. Sorry, Dennis, what was your question again? I couldn't quite.
اليوم بدي اروح اجيب الاولاد على الاربعه.
Abdul Hamid, mute yourself.
سوي لهم.
Sorry,
اليوم
Dennis.
اثنين بخلصوا عندهم درس اسمه نشيد.
Okay, Dennis?
Yes.
Please.
So I'll go there. I'll go there around the 3:45, and I will pick them up here. And
Abdul Hamid.
Can my colleagues who are on the Zoom please write to Abdul Hamid and tell him to mute? Yes, Dennis, please.
So Trump repeatedly told and intends to rename several geographical names, namely Gulf of Mexico into Gulf of America. So what's UN's opinion on that? That's the first question.
I don't have any particular reaction to this. I believe that a lot of the various naming conventions are well established and are not really the purview of any one individual state.
And the second one, lately Dean Sousan, Vice Premier of China, told that the rules of artificial intelligence should be supervised by the UN. What's your reaction on that?
I think the Secretary General will have fairly detailed comments on artificial intelligence to say when he makes his presentation at Davos tomorrow, and I welcome you to look at the remarks he'll make then. And with that, I will now turn the floor over to our guest.